continuing this program of monthly Gosho lectures. I chose today, as you see from the paper given to you when you came in, a very short but truly powerful Gosho called Reply to a Believer. So I'd like to start straight away by asking John to read it to you all. Okay?
Reply to a Believer. I have just received your letter. Considering how disasters have struck one after another in the wake of Nichiren's exile, would they dare attempt to harass us any further? I feel they will do no more, but people on the brink of ruin are capable of anything. Should some persecution be about to occur, there will certainly be signs. Even if I were to be exiled again, it would bring 10 billion times greater good fortune than if my teachings were to be accepted. The next exile would be my third. Should it happen, the Lotus Sutra could never accuse me of being a faint-hearted votary. I might well become heir to the blessings of Shakyamuni, Tahoe, and all the other Buddhas of the 10 directions, as well as those of the countless bodhisattvas of the earth. How wonderful if that were to come about. I will follow in the path of Sessendoji and live as did Bodhisattva Fukyo. In comparison to such a life, how wretched and meaningless it would be to fall victim to an epidemic or simply to die of old age. I would far rather suffer persecution from this country's ruler for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, and thereby free myself from the sufferings of birth and death. Then I could test the vows that the sun goddess, Hachiman, the gods of the sun and the moon, Taishaku and Bonten, made in the presence of the Buddha. Above all, I will urge them to protect every one of you. If you continue living as you are now, there can be no doubt that you are practicing the Lotus Sutra 24 hours each day. Regard your service to your Lord as the practice of the Lotus Sutra. The Hokke Gengi makes precisely this point when it says, "No affairs of life or work are in any way different from the ultimate reality." I fully understand what you have said in your letter. With my deep respect, Nichiren, the 11th day of the 4th month.
Thank you very much. This Gosho was written, we don't know exactly who, but most likely to Shijo Kingo. In the extant original of this Gosho, there is no indication of its recipient, nor of its date, but by the various matters mentioned in it, the guess is about April 1278. That is to say, the year before the Daiga Honzen was inscribed. So that's about 708 years ago. And therefore, if that date is correct, which it almost certainly is, then it was written after Nichiren Daishonin had retired to Mount Manobu. At that time, 1278, the Atsuhara persecution against Nichiren Daishonin's followers in that area, which is in fact, Atsuhara is just a few miles south of the head temple, Taisekiji. It was in full blast at that time. The Atsuhara persecution wasn't a one-night affair. It lasted for about 3 years, from 1278 to 1280, during which period the ruling authorities, especially directed by that famous gentleman, Heino Simon, who was deputy director of what was called military and police affairs of the government of that day, led this attack on Nichiren Daishonin's followers. Most of them were peasant farmers, and over those 3 years they suffered mightily. with all sorts of forms of harassment, from excessive taxation to destruction of their crops, to banishment, to imprisonment, and so on. And this persecution reached its peak in 1279, the year after this Gosho was written. In August of that year, one of Nichiren Daishonin's followers, his name was Yashiro, was beheaded. But nobody actually knows the reasons that were put up for that. In other words, it wasn't necessarily that he was attacked specifically because of his faith. But on the 21st of September, just a month and a half later, 20 peasant farmers were arrested. And despite the fact that Nichiren Daishonin and Nikko Shonin went to Kamakura, the seat of government, in order to appeal on their behalf, these 20 farmers were taken to Kamakura, and Heino Simon had them tortured there and tried to make them give up their faith. But wonderfully, not a single one of those 20 yielded to this pressure. As an example to the rest of Nichiren Daishonin's followers, Heino Simon then had 3 of the farmers beheaded. This execution took place on the 15th of October, and the remaining farmers were banished from their farms and families in Asahara to other parts, remoter parts of Japan. So just 3 days before the execution of these 3 farmers, and in the midst of all this turmoil, Nichiren Daishonin, who was inspired by the incredible faith of his followers, determined that the time had come to establish true Buddhism forever. And on the 12th of October, as you know, he inscribed the Daiga Honzen, knowing absolutely without doubt that his followers from then onwards would definitely protect the Daiga Honzen forever. So one must remember that this Daiga Honzen was the most crucial part of the will and testament of Nichiren Daishonin. Therefore, his concern that it would never be destroyed and always be protected was very great indeed. So sometimes when we hear the Asahara persecution being explained, it seems almost like Nichiren Daishonin waited until 3 people were beheaded before he inscribed the Daiga Honzen. Of course, that is not so. The Asahara persecution had been going on a long time, and it was the incredible faith of everybody before those beheadings that caused him to decide that the time had come, the time was ripe, and that people would defend that Gonzen with their whole lives. So when you go, if you haven't already been, to the head temple at Taisekeji, you can chant Daimoku in front of the graves of those 3 martyrs. Their names were Jinshiro, Yaguro, and Yarokuro. And of course, it's an extraordinary thing when you go to see those graves to discover that when the Shohondo was built, so many hundreds and hundreds of years later, it was built in a situation which is precisely facing the graves of those 3 martyrs. Or perhaps one should put it, the graves of those 3 martyrs are precisely facing the Daiga Honzen in that great building, the Shohondo. It's exactly as if over all those hundreds of years, those 3 martyrs continued to defend the Daiga Honzen with their whole lives. And the other thought that may strike you is that for hundreds of years, and no doubt for hundreds and hundreds of years into the future, those 3 farmers are constantly receiving the daimoku of millions and millions of people who make the pilgrimage to Taisekeji. So we can't possibly doubt their incredible good fortune, wherever they may be at this particular point in time. When we received the Jojo Gohonzon, that great Gohonzon that we have enshrined at the Richmond Center, on the 12th of December 1982, I think it was for us all a profound and moving moment, because we knew that it meant that at last NSUK was strong enough in faith to protect it. And we knew too that it would be the beginning of a new phase. I'm sure Mr. Toda too, when he enshrined the first Jojo Gohonzon ever to be given to a lay organization, which was dedicated to the Soka Gakkai and enshrined at the Soka Gakkai headquarters in 1951, he must have felt the same. And as you may know, from that time he lived just for 7 years, dying in 1958. And during that people, the Soka Gakkai expanded to such a strength that never again would it have been possible for this understanding of the law to hang by a narrow thread as it did during the persecutions of World War II, when really fundamentally just two people, Mr. Toda and Mr. Makiguchi, defended the Gohonzon during their period in prison. So in that 7 years, 750,000 families took up faith in the Dai Gohonzon. And it's interesting too that in the years that immediately followed the enshrining of the Jojo Gohonzon at our Richmond Center, many things have happened. Definitely it marked an extraordinary surge forward in NSUK. It was followed in a few months by the World Peace Exposition, which was a great turning point. And in that year following, 1983, we increased our membership at a rate which we had never, ever before succeeded in doing, of around 35% increase. So it's very profound, isn't it, the effect that the Jojo Gohonzon has. And I'm sure, too, that when at last we can enshrine the same Jojo Gohonzon in the new center, then indeed, too, that will prove to be another great turning point and another great surge forward for NSUK. So, of course, none of these things happen by chance. Everything is in the rhythm of this amazing movement for Causton Rufu. So, with that background, let's now turn to this Gosho and study it in a good deal of detail. So, John, can you bring to read?
Right. I have just received your letter. Considering how disasters have struck one after another in the wake of Nichiren's exile, would they dare attempt to harass us any further? I feel they will do no more, but people on the brink of ruin are capable of anything.
Thank you. So Nichiren Daishonin is referring there, of course, to the disasters which have been occurring in Japan over a number of years, and to the predictions which he made specifically in the Risho Ankokuron in 1260. That was 18 years before this Gosho. And also in two more remonstrations to the government which followed. And these predictions had come true. What Nichiren Daishonin, for those of you who are not certain, said or declared in the famous Gosho, the Risho Ankokuron, was that disasters would continue to occur in succession unless Japan changed its ways and followed the true teachings which Shakyamuni Buddha himself had indicated would arise from the Lotus Sutra. So these disasters have been horrendous. I think we all know the story. But one after another, earthquakes and floods, famines, droughts, fires, epidemics occurred with extraordinary, rapid succession. And the population of Japan, through all this, had been halved. So Nichiren Daishonin explained that through following false teachings, the life force of the people had been sapped. that the negative side of their lives, in other words, was being activated rather than the positive side. And because of this, they were unable to feed the forces of the universe with the power of positive life force. So, as a result of this, he describes it as if the protective forces of the universe, the Shoten Zenjin, which we chant for in the first prayer of Gongyo every day, the Buddhist gods, had left the land and left the Japanese people. And this is why these disasters, which were all natural disasters, occurred one after the other. Now, furthermore, Nichiren Daishonin went on in the Risho Ankokuron and in many other writings and declarations thereafter to state that unless this change occurred and the Japanese people ceased slandering the Lotus Sutra, the supreme teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha, then the two remaining disasters which had not yet occurred, that is to say, internal strife and invasion by a foreign power, were absolutely inevitable. And in the event, as you may know, internal strife broke out in about 1273 for the first time whilst Nichiren Daishonin was on Sado Island, and of course the history of Japan thenceforward was a succession of minor civil wars or struggles within the land of Japan. And secondly, the Mongols invaded under Kublai Khan the Japanese islands in 1274 and again in 1281. And it's worth noting that that date, 1274, is 14 years, 7 by 7, after the Risho Ankokuron was delivered to the government. And 1281, the second invasion, took place exactly 7 years after the first invasion. So again, one sees a sort of rhythm to this history of Kosen Rufu, just as we see a rhythm to it in our present times, and just as we shall always see a rhythm to it in the future. And this makes one realize, I think you could say it's the profound fact that Kosen Rufu is not something extraordinary. Kosen Rufu is part of the pattern of human life, part of the development of human life on this particular planet. In other words, Kosen Rufu is inevitable. And this is why Nichiren Daishonin so clearly said that it would occur as sure as an arrow aimed at the earth cannot miss its target. And this is why, too, neither Nichiren Daishonin nor ever other Buddha has predicted a Holocaust which would destroy the world. Kosen Rufu is bound to happen, provided we all and our fellow members all over the world continue to struggle and never give up. Inevitably, then, Kosen Rufu will occur because it is part of the rhythm of the life on this planet. So in this short opening lines, Nichiren Daishonin ends by saying, people on the brink of ruin are capable of anything. In fact, although the Atsuhara persecution went on until 1980, as I mentioned, the government did leave Nichiren Daishonin himself alone. They wouldn't listen to him any further. They wouldn't heed what he was saying, but their superstition was enough to cause them not to try to interfere with this man who had made such extraordinarily accurate predictions anymore. So perhaps due to the stupidity and pride of the ruling authorities, they tried to find a sort of compromise in that way. So this sentence, which reads, people on the brink of ruin are capable of anything, is, however, very valid for every one of us today, isn't it? People on the brink of ruin are capable of anything. And I think we only have to look back even 50 years in history, let alone 1,000 years in history, to see many, many cases where people in power who were on the brink of ruin literally did prove to be capable of anything. So if you look, taking that last 50 years, at Hitler and Mussolini, before they were finally killed or died by their own hand, they extended the slaughter and the persecution of Jews up to the very last moment, indeed accelerated it. Another, perhaps lesser example, Mr. Idi Amin of Uganda, who, as he came towards the brink of ruin, slaughtered people, or had them slaughtered by their thousands. The Duval family in Haiti. Marcos in the Philippines, only in a different way. Marcos was bleeding the country dry economically. Wherever you look in history, it's very easy to pick up examples of how people on the edge or the brink are desperate and will do anything. And this, of course, also has a relevance to us in the UK. It's of great concern that at the present time, anger, hate, what I would call desperate extremism on the part of a small number of people, terrorism, is increasing every year, and particularly it's increased, hasn't it, in the last 2 years perhaps. This tendency towards self-destruction has to be arrested before those forces, those negative forces of anger and hate and desperation actually seize power and control our democracy. How will it be arrested? This negative, destructive force, which we all know is an inherent part of life. How can it be arrested? How can it be stopped from running rampant even further? I'm convinced, and I'm sure you're all convinced, there's only one way. It's only by generating the positive life force of the people that this protection will come, through feeding the protective forces of the universe, specifically this particular country from our point of view. Through activating this life force in more and more and more people, definitely we can overcome this trend. But there's no time to delay. We have to, shakabuku, don't we? We have to make sure that every week, every month, every year, there are more and more people activating their positive life force and feeding those influences or forces from the universe so that they are fulfilling their true function, which is the protection of this land, this society, and people. I'll never forget last year President Keda's words to me when I mentioned my concern about the deterioration in the stability of the UK. And he said, the only way is to steadily increase the number of people who are chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Then, without fail, those dark clouds will just disappear, he said. They will just disappear over the horizon like storm clouds. I believe this with my whole heart. This is the only way. There is no politician, no statesman who can arrest this tendency. This tendency is arising, isn't it, from the hearts of the people. Therefore, inevitably, the only way to arrest that tendency is to change the hearts of more and more people so that we can arrest this tendency, achieve a balance, and eventually start to push the trend or the spirit of the British people towards positive value and happiness. So you can see from that point of view that our fantastic musical show, Alice, is not by any means an end in itself, is it? I look upon Alice as just a beginning, another great beginning for NSUK, another fantastic start, a launching pad, if you like. It's the starter's gun for another great effort to move forward. And I'm sure it will be, because this show will have a profound effect on everyone's faith who's had to struggle in one way or another to take part in it or to bring people to it. As a result of that, the faith of NSUK and its members will be deepened. And once more, we must move forward and shakabuku. So this is a very crucial time. On the other hand, it's an incredibly wonderful time to be a part of this, to know that us very ordinary people, living probably very ordinary lives, have it in our power to be able to arrest the downward trend in this part of the world. So please, let's do it. Don't hesitate. This is our purpose. This is why we appeared in this particular land of Britain. This is the action as predicted 3,000 years ago in the Lotus Sutra, that the bodhisattvas of the earth were predicted to fulfill. So with that sort of spirit, let's really gather our friends around us and really go forward, determined between now and 1990 to bring about yet another great change towards stabilizing our society. Right, John.
Should some persecution be about to occur, there will certainly be signs. Even if I were to be exiled again, it would bring 10 million times greater good fortune than if my teachings were to be accepted. The next exile would be my third. Should it happen, the Lotus Sutra could never accuse me of being a faint-hearted votary. I might well become heir to the blessings of Shakyamuni, Tahoe, and all the other Buddhas of the 10 directions, as well as those of the countless bodhisattvas of the earth. How wonderful if that were to come about.
So the Daishonin says it would bring 10 billion times greater good fortune than if my teachings were to be accepted. It's an interesting line, isn't it? One worth pondering about a bit. What is he saying? Shakabuku is difficult. Shakabuku is meant to be difficult. In the perfect roundness of the workings of the law. If it was easy, how could we, each one of us, possibly make the causes to change our unhappy karma? And if we don't change our unhappy karma individually, how can we expect the karma of our country or of our continent or of the whole world to be changed? It's effort, isn't it, which is the cause that brings about the effect of not only changing our karma, but also bringing about a change in society. If Nichiren Daishonins were just easily accepted by everybody, we'd have everyone chanting Daimoku in this country very quickly. But on the other hand, even though we had millions chanting, we wouldn't have changed our karma and the country's karma. The human revolution has to take place exactly in harmony with the movement for Causton Rufu. Otherwise, it will only be achieving half its aim. So, shakabuku is difficult, but on the other hand, shakabuku is never impossible, is it? We all know that only too well. So in the perfect balance and rhythm of the law, which is called Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, provided we don't give in, provided we don't panic, provided we don't get upset and bitter because we aren't successful in shakabuku, provided we really develop our Buddha compassion, then we will be able to shakabuku. We have to make effort, but we will be successful, as many of you have proved. And we'll be successful at exactly the right pace to ensure that Causton Rufu will occur in this country as sure as an arrow aimed at the earth cannot miss the target. There is a necessary rhythm. That rhythm is neither too slow nor too fast. If we shakabuku for the wrong motives, if we shakabuku just to try to obtain benefit, it could as easily be from the point of view of greed. We have to learn to shakabuku through compassion. And it's only people we shakabuku through compassion who will be the right people to continue to practice till the very end of their days. So it's the magnet, I was searching for the word, it's the magnet of compassion which draws the right person to you at the right time when they most need to receive the Gohonzon. And I bet if each one of you looks at the circumstances and time that you received the Gohonzon, you can really see that it was just at the right time for you. And then Nichiren Daishonin goes on, the Lotus Sutra can never accuse me of being a faint-hearted votary. My goodness, I should think not. The Lotus Sutra equals, doesn't it, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, or the Gohonzon. And Nam-myoho Renge Kyo includes Renge, cause and effect. So he's talking about cause and effect here. If we're faint-hearted, then inevitably the causes we make are faint-hearted. And the effects will be faint-hearted in our own lives in terms of good fortune and benefit from those efforts, and also in the successful result of our shakabuku. As we've said so often, nothing is worth doing faint-heartedly. Things are only worth doing wholeheartedly. And Nichiren Daishonin goes on to say, I might well become heir to the blessings of Shakyamuni, Taho, and all the other Buddhas of the 10 directions, as well as those of the countless bodhisattvas of the earth. How wonderful if that were to come about. That if is worth underlining, because it has an important meaning, and it's not necessarily the obvious one. When he's talking about the blessings of Shakyamuni, Taho, and all the other Buddhas of the 10 directions, as well as those of the countless bodhisattvas of the earth, of course he is talking about the blessings of the true Buddha. The blessings, in other words, of all the Buddhas and all the bodhisattvas of the past, the present, and the future, all of which are contained in the life of the true Buddha. But in the Gosho on the true entity of life, Nichiren Daishonin says, you too are a true Buddha. How about that? You too are a true Buddha. In other words, the blessings of all those Buddhas and bodhisattvas, the blessings of the true Buddha himself, are also contained within our own lives, if we choose to exert ourselves. And this is the cause which brings those blessings to us, or, if you like, causes that good fortune to blossom forth from our lives. So all these blessings can be ours. And Nichiren Daishonin says, how wonderful if that were to come about. So it doesn't mean that he's doubting whether those blessings will appear. Despite all he has done, all those incredible, awful persecutions that he went through, he is still concerned about whether he has done enough. That is the meaning of that if. Has he is saying, really given everything, given enough, been wholehearted enough to earn all those incredible blessings which were promised to the bodhisattvas of the earth in the Lotus Sutra? And that's really, quite an important point for us to think about, isn't it? We find people, probably all of us did it at one time or another, feeling the Gonzans failed us, even getting angry with the Gonzans, becoming filled with doubts because we feel that a bit of time's passed without seeing any benefit. Of course, those benefits may be flowing into our lives, but the point is, have we done enough? If Nichiren Daishonin says that were to come about, how wonderful it would be. In other words, the benefit is just an incredible bonus. We should do shakabuku just because we care so much for other people and for their sufferings, not just so that we can get benefit. And that is the proof of whether we're giving enough. So if any of us feel we're not getting benefits, or we're not feeling we're changing anything, the first question ought to be, before one's examining whether one's doing the three practices even, the first question should be, am I really doing things wholeheartedly? Or am I faint-hearted and therefore not making the causes to bring about the effects? So earlier I was talking about the three martyrs of Atsahara. I think there can be no doubt, can there, that they really gave wholeheartedly. Whether they were tortured or faced with the threat of execution. And most of those Atsahara farmers hadn't had more than 3 years' practice. That we know, because it was Nikko Shonin's Shakabuku campaign when they first took faith in the Gonzan. So they weren't people with many, many years. They were really quite new members. So those three who died for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, or for the sake of the Gonzan, as I said, are receiving daimoku from millions and millions and millions of people every year for hundreds of years and on for another, for hundreds of years in the future. So in terms of eternal life, how much good fortune must they have? So their attitude was the actual proof, wasn't it? Their joy of the practice. It must have been that they could withstand the threat of death. Incredible, really. Their love for Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Their deep respect for the validity of everything that Nichiren Daishonin had taught them. Knowing, not worrying about benefit, just feeling so grateful to be one with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So sometimes when we're in a certain state of life, our chanting is really, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. Give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. So really, I mean, if the Gonzan could talk, I'm sure, it would be saying, I've proved I can give. You've had proof I can give. Then why on earth do you keep on asking me? It's about time you did something, isn't it? So this is what Nichiren Daishonin's concern was, even him. It's incredible, really. Who'd given his whole life. Yet still, if he said, have I really yet done enough? So that slogan of ours, giving everything is gaining everything, so let's give, is really quite a profound slogan, isn't it? It sounds a bit jingo-ish, but if you think of the words, they're really a great reminder to us. Am I giving? Or am I always saying, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me? Okay, John?
I will follow in the path of Sesendoji and live as did Bodhisattva Fukyo. In comparison to such a life, how wretched and meaningless it would be to fall victim to an epidemic or simply to die of old age.
Thank you. So Sesendoji should be a familiar name by now to most of you. We mentioned it in past lectures on a number of occasions this year, and you know the story. The important point being that Sesendoji had such a strong seeking mind that he was willing to leap into that horrible demon's mouth and give him a good feed in order to hear the last verses of a Buddhist teaching. And he decided he'd go up the tree and jump from it into the demon's mouth. And that's how that saying is now quite well known in MSUK about letting go of the last twig. Really giving our lives to the Gohonzon, stopping doubting, just throwing our lives, if you like, throwing our problems, throwing our difficulties, throwing ourselves to the Gohonzon, and jumping from that branch into the demon's mouth. And of course, the demon is an imaginary one. The demon represents all those things that are trying to stop us from jumping. Something that we're holding on to in our own lives. Not letting go. So he gave everything and jumped. When you see Alice, I won't dwell on this anymore. When you see Alice, you'll be reminded of this story again. Enough. I'm not going to give the secret away. Then Nichiren Daishonin talks about Bodhisattva Fukyo. Maybe he's not so well known to some of you. Bodhisattva Fukyo was an amusing and amazing person, really, in many ways. He appears in the 20th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And according to the story, in a past age, long ago, at that time and in that particular world, Buddhism was in decline because it was in the middle day of the law, in the age of Zoho. And Bodhisattva Fukyo, who of course was a Buddhist, was really being harassed by the ordinary people of the place where he lived. He was ridiculed, told he was crazy and mad for having such faith, and the people, whenever they saw him in the street, used to beat him with sticks or hurl rocks and stones at him. And Bodhisattva Fukyo was in no doubt whatsoever that this was his karma. To suffer like this was retribution for slander that he'd created in a past life. So, to help himself never complain, to stop himself from blaming anyone else, to stop himself from hating those people who threw rocks and stones at him, he used to bow to them. And according to the Lotus Sutra, he said, I deeply respect you all. I bet that'd be difficult, wouldn't it? If you were in Ulster at the moment and received a rock full tilt at your head, unlikely, you'd say, I deeply respect you all. And he went on, I would not dare to despise you or be arrogant, for you will all practice the Bodhisattva way and surely attain Buddhahood. So this little speech he used to make whenever he was under attack. So, of course, this story is, it's an invention of Shakyamuni's, but it was to show us the way we should view our karma, our present sufferings and difficulties. We find it so extraordinarily difficult, don't we, to accept that whatever's happening to us now is our karma. It must be a cause which has brought the effect of what's happening at this moment, and we must have made the cause. How could anyone else have made the cause? It must be ourselves, mustn't it? So we lash out in our minds or with words, or worse still sometimes in action, and we try to blame somebody or something, the government or our parents or our wives or husbands, our bosses, whatever. But we must blame something to be able to sort of rest easy. But the fact is, we shouldn't rest easy. We should be facing what's happening to us now at this very moment is, as in a mirror, Nichiren Daishonin said, what we did in the past. What we are suffering now, we did to others. What is great for us now is because we also gave greatness to others. So Mr. Izumi, and I've often quoted it in personal guidance, always said, it's 100% our own fault. 100%. It's never 50-50, someone else's and yours, let alone, 80-20. It's 100% our fault. We made the cause. So I really feel this is a very strong problem in this country. I mean, the British have always been great at moaning, haven't they? And blaming, actually, when you think about it. Lots of the jokes of comedians for hundreds of years have been about, from Shakespeare down to the present day, have been about that tendency in the British to always moan and complain and want to blame somebody, grumbling and all the rest of it. After 20 years in the army, I'm quite an expert myself, or I used to be. So this is an important point for us, I feel, very specific to the British nature and character. And the more we teach this, the more we try to open people's eyes and minds to the existence of the law of cause and effect, the more value we are creating in society. Just not long ago, old Lord Macmillan, now in his 90s, as you know, said, what worries me more than anything, he said, is that this country has suddenly become filled with hate. And that sort of hate is nothing else but blaming. It arises from that cause. So I feel, this is another reason why we have to do shakabuku. We all know, because we are struggling now, or we have struggled, to 100% realize that what is happening to us is because of the causes we made. We know it's difficult. So we should be spreading that teaching and trying to shakabuku and get more and more people to face their karma. Because unless they can face their karma, unless they can realize this, they can never, ever change it. And they will go on blaming, complaining, and hating in lifetime after lifetime. And making the conditions of our own country worse and worse and worse in this lifetime alone. So we can't change the karma of our country, let alone of individuals, unless this reality becomes known by more and more and more people. And of course, the second point of that Fukyo, Bodhisattva Fukyo story, is that if we slander and hate others, especially if we're practicing Buddhists, then of course we are slandering knowingly the Gohonzon, or the Buddha state, in those people's lives. So as you know, Nichiren Daishonin taught the existence of a reverse relationship. That even if a person slanders the true law or the Gohonzon, that is better than having no connection at all. that if a person slanders the Gonzen, at least they have made a connection. And through that, and through cause and effect working in their lives, gradually they will come to realize it. So this is an amazing thing, but many of us maybe have seen proof of it in our actual experiences, perhaps with our families and so on. But this is a reality. So, in other words, if Bodhisattva Phuttho had really hated or blamed those people, he would have been slandering people who sometime, as he said in his little speech, would bring forth Buddha and Bodhisattva from their lives. So this is another important consideration. Then Nichiren Daishonin goes on, how wretched it would be to fall victim to an epidemic or simply to die of old age. This I find a very wonderful passage, perhaps because I'm really on the way to getting old now, if not already there. How wretched it would be to fall victim to an epidemic or simply to die of old age. How awful, he's saying, to go through life without changing one's karma one jot. And then to die of sickness or old age. Of course, knowing really in one's heart probably that one has failed, that one has achieved, as Nichiren Daishonin put it in the Gosho, nothing remarkable. That life had been one long, meaningless chore. And of course, this would mean that the next life would be a similar meaningless chore as well. So, to die knowing that you've won the battle of life is the most important thing. Sensei said this so often. To die knowing that you've done something valuable, even though it may be quite small, but it's something of value. And that time or moment when you achieved it, the glory of it in your own life will never be forgotten. This is the way of Buddhism. Okay, John?
I would far rather suffer persecution from this country's ruler for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, and thereby free myself from the sufferings of birth and death. Then I could test the vows that the sun goddess, Hachiman, the gods of the sun and the moon, Taishaku and Bonten, made in the presence of the Buddha. Above all, I will urge them to protect every one of you.
So Nichiren Daishonin is saying there, that fighting our sufferings, facing our obstacles, challenging our karma, through that we are making the causes to become strong and to purify our lives. Not just for this lifetime, but for eternity. And how do we do it? How do we challenge? He then goes on to say, testing the vows that the sun goddess, Hachiman, the gods of the sun and moon, Taishaku and Bonten, made in the presence of the Buddha. So these are the vows he's referring to, which were made by the Buddhist gods, by the forces of the universe, in the ceremony in the air, in the Lotus Sutra. These pledges to protect the votary of the Lotus Sutra and the bodhisattvas of the earth. So he says, interestingly, then I would have a chance to test. Actually, he'd already done it at Tatsunokuchi in 1271. There he put the Buddhist gods, the forces of the universe, to the test, good and proper, and proved to his total satisfaction that amazing protection which prevented him from being beheaded. He lived and died of old age, a natural death, because all the Buddhist gods, all the forces of the universe, summoned themselves up and protected him by sending that comet or whatever it was across the skies at the very moment that the sword was above Nichiren Daishonin's head to be executed. So as I usually say, it sounds like a fairy story, But it's in every Japanese history book. It's common knowledge throughout Japan, this extraordinary incident which saved Nichiren Daishonin's life. So he put the Buddhist gods to the test. He proved totally for himself the validity of everything that he taught. And most important of all, he proved that he was the Buddha in rhythm with all things in the universe. So he is saying here, one can put these forces to the test for our sakes. And what is more, everything that happened on that day, or on that night, in September 1271, as Nichiren Daishonin was taken to the beach at Tatsunokuchi to be beheaded, was for no one else but for us. He demonstrated to us how we can do it if we have a mind and the guts to do so. Whatever the difficulty, whatever the horrendous problem we're facing, which is driving us up the wall and seems to have got us in the corner, I promise you with my whole heart, the way is through the spirit which Nichiren Daishonin showed at Tatsunokuchi. What did he do? I know some of you, many of you, have heard me say this before. Many of you know the story. He was arrested by something like 240 samurai, with Heino Simon in charge. And on the way down to the beach, he passed the Hachiman shrine. This was a shrine to the Buddhist god, to the force of the universe, which was given the title of Hachiman. And he said to the samurai, I want to get off here. I won't give you any trouble. Just give me a moment or two. And he got off his horse, and he knelt down in front of the Hachiman shrine, and he chanted Daimoku and prayed. But most unusually, he prayed out loud. Why did he pray out loud? Because he knew that through doing that, he would teach us. He would teach his followers of the day, and through his followers, that happening would go down through the ages to everyone who were his disciples and followers. And to quote from On the Buddha's Behavior in Volume 1, which everyone should read, he said this about that moment. I called out, in other words, to the soldier, if I'm to be executed tonight, in his prayers this was, I called out, if I am to be executed tonight and go to the pure land of Eagle Peak, I shall report at once to Shakyamuni Buddha that Tensho Daijin and Hachiman, that's two of the Buddhist gods, have broken their oath to him. If you feel this will go hard on you, you had better do something about it right away. Then he ends by saying, having spoken, I remounted my horse. So that was his attitude. That should be our attitude. I promise you, based on my own personal experience, you will overcome any most dire obstacle and difficulty if you have the Tatsunokuchi spirit. If you approach the Gonzen not saying, help me, help me, help me, but if you throw out your chest in front of the Gonzen and call upon all the Buddhist gods to prove that the protection they promised is there, I definitely promise you that is the way you can overcome any dire incident, any really horrendous situation. And this is why he did it. Please remember it. Please go to your Gonzen and not say, please, 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 help me, help me, help me. That is not the way to pray to the Gonzen. Nichiren Daishonin is saying that the true Buddha is you. the forces of the universe will come to you if you challenge life and challenge them in that way. And of course, in the rhythm of this practice, in the perfect roundness of this Buddhism, it's such an experience, such a proof in one's life that makes one so strong. How can you ever doubt Nichiren Daishonin's teachings again when you've put this to the test and you've seen somehow all these forces supporting you and overcoming that difficulty in a way you could never have dreamt? Of course it's cause and effect, isn't it? Of course it's again not being faint-hearted. But please understand, this is why Tatsunokuchi occurred. There were other reasons, but for us this is why. So that we could learn and so that we could use the power of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in the same way that he did. Ichinen Daimoku, prayer, isn't it? Through that we can overcome anything. Whatever one's karma, however heavy it may be, however impossible the situation seems. Wow, it's amazing, I tell you. Okay.
If you continue living as you are now, there can be no doubt that you are practicing the Lotus Sutra 24 hours each day. Regard your service to your Lord as the practice of the Lotus Sutra. The Hokke Gengi makes precisely this point when it says, no affairs of life or work are in any way different from the ultimate reality. I fully understand what you have said in your letter.
So in these final lines, Nichiren Daishonin is really encouraging the recipient, who we presume was Shijo Kingo. He knew he was facing difficulties. He's saying, don't panic or doubt. Don't worry. You're really practicing great, he's saying. I know you're doing your best. I know you're doing gongyo morning and evening, he could say to us. I know you're trying your best, shakabuku. I know you're trying hard to remember to do a little bit of study every day. Don't worry, you're doing everything. That's great. This is what he's saying. You're practicing the Lotus Sutra 24 hours a day. But there's one other point that we have to remember too. He then says, regard your service to your Lord as the practice of the Lotus Sutra. We are human beings. It is our purpose or mission to be able to serve our fellow human beings and also this earth that we live on. This is the truth of it. We are not supposed to sit back like lotus eaters and do nothing or float around, eating grapes like Roman emperors. We are supposed to work hard. We are supposed to look after our families. This is humanity, isn't it? We are supposed to contribute to society in that way. We are supposed to do something to keep this world a vibrant, prosperous, happy place to live. We could never do that by lounging about and doing nothing all day. So work, family, social life, friends, these are all part of Buddhism. We should be as wholehearted in approaching those aspects of life as we are in our Buddhist practice. Because it is Buddhism. As he says in this paragraph, there is no separation between the affairs of this world and the ultimate reality. We are making as much of a cause for ourselves to change our karma and to build good fortune through looking after our families, caring for our friends, making a point of getting to know people, keeping our eyes open for people who look as if they're suffering, being able to say some words of encouragement to them. All these things are Buddhism. In other words, Buddhism is saying, live wholeheartedly, 24 hours a day. Then you're practicing truly Buddhism itself, 24 hours a day. So we are in this world and we are of this world. If we try to escape from it, it'll lead to nothing but disaster. And what is more, nirvana is right here and now, in this lifetime. So in the Gosho, the person in the law, Nichiren Daishonin said, since the law is supreme, the person is worthy of respect. Since the person is worthy of respect, the land is sacred. The Jinriki chapter reads, whether in a grove, under a tree, or in a monastery, the Buddhas enter nirvana. We create the Buddha's land about us, wherever may be. Even in a miserable bed-sitter, which we may find ourselves in when we first start to practice. Maybe damp. Maybe the people on the next room create a hell of a noise and prevent you sleeping. But if we practice there, we will create the Buddha's land even there. The important thing is to practice. And then through that effort, through the cause that we make in trying to create the best conditions in that lousy situation, there is the cause then for one to move on to something better, to earn benefit. So the Buddha's land is here and now. And that is why Nichiren Daishonin says nirvana is in a grove of trees somewhere in the countryside. Or it could be in a monastery, but it's right here in this world. So we have to face our fellow human beings. We have to learn to tolerate their differences. We have to respect that the Buddha state actually exists in every single person we meet, even though they throw sticks and stones at us like Bodhisattva Phukyo. We have to long to be able to bring such people who are obviously suffering if they commit such stupid, disastrous acts. We long to shakabuku them, and we want to prove the power of the Gonzen wherever we go, in the way we work, in the way we look after our families, in the way we live life. So this is Kosen Rufu, each one in his own environment, in his own place. We come together every so often, like this, then we part company. And we do Kosen Rufu in our own environment. This is how people learn about the power of the Gonzen. So you've listened very patiently, and I've gone 10 minutes over time. I apologize for that. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Many thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.